So today, you guys, we're going to be talking about tracking animals across the globe. And so we're going to talk about a bunch of different kinds of animals and how we track them. So first, we're going to go through the technology used to track them. We're going to talk about different animals that are tracked. And then we're going to get into our homework for the day. So you guys already know this. I think we might have some new people that are possibly joining partway through, but I'm Megan and I'm Aiden and Lizzie's mom, and I work at scientist.com. So I either work with your parents or maybe friends of your parents. And I really love science. So I'm going to be helping you guys out today. And today we have a new picture of this confused dog who clearly thinks he's an otter, but he's not an otter. And so we're talking today so that I can help you guys because you're out of school. Maybe you even think you're an otter at this point. I don't know what we're all doing. And so I want to help while your moms and dads are working, and you still need to get an education. And I don't want you to get left behind. And I certainly don't want you to get left with a pack of otters somewhere, right, Lizzie? So we're going to be going through a couple different things today. So first, we're going to talk about the science behind actually tracking animals. So why do we track animals? This is a really interesting topic. So we want to gather information about their movements and about their habits. And that includes their range, so where they go. It includes the habitats, so what kinds of areas they're living in, like if it's the jungle or the desert or the forest. We want to know how much they move on a daily basis and where they're going. And then how many of them are there? So that's population data. We're also collecting data for further research or control measures. So maybe there's too much of a population of an animal or there's not enough of that animal. And so we want to track them to try to help keep them safe. We're also protecting those animals from people who might want to harm them. So unfortunately, some kinds of animals that are used for some of their, like maybe their fur or their skin or their horns. Sometimes people want to trap them in the wild, and that's not a good idea because they're endangered. And so we want to kind of keep them safe. And the other thing we do with tracking is help to keep animals and people separate. So a good example is tracking a tiger, like you see here, so that when he gets too close to a village, maybe bright lights turn on and scare him away. So that way it keeps the people and the tiger separate, and so then hopefully nobody gets hurt. Yes, Lizzie?
So like the dragons in Harry Potter?
Yes, kind of like the dragons in Harry Potter. We're tracking them to keep everyone safe, not just the dragons, but the people too.
Don't touch, don't touch.
So how do we track animals? There's a couple different ways, and I'm going to explain them all. So the first one is called manual or surveillance or surveying, and it's been around for a super long time. The next one is VHF radio tracking. Then we're going to talk about satellite tracking and global positioning system or GPS tracking. And you guys probably have heard GPS before, like with cars or with our phones to figure out where to go. And so we can actually use that for animals as well. So the first one is surveying. And surveying is kind of like tracking manually. And manual means by hand. So here we're using our eyes and we're using our ears to track animals rather than using technology. So this is actually the oldest way to track animals. And you might look for signs of their presence, like their tracks in the dirt. So you can buy books and manuals that have all of their footprints and things in them to help you find them. You can also look for signs of their presence, like they're using resources. So things like deer. You can see on this tree there's some bark missing, so that might help show you that a deer has been around lately, or even bears, because bears like to scratch on trees. The other way is to look for their poops. So you can find animal poop, or we call it scat, and you can identify the animal that left it by the shape and the amount and things like that. And so that can help you know that, hey, there's been a bunny rabbit here lately because there's bunny poop. So the good part about this is that it's really inexpensive for you to do. You can teach yourself how to do it or learn from somebody else, but it's also limited because it's hard to follow an animal around constantly, right? Like we can't just pick a bear and watch it 24 hours a day. So it helps a little bit, but it's not good for research purposes because it's very limited as far as data. And also you could only follow one animal at a time that way, unless they were always hanging out in a group. So there's also something called crowdsourcing. And today some animals are tracked manually where we're going out with our eyes and ears and looking and listening for them. But then we're taking the results of that and we're sharing that with a really big group. And when we share all that data, it becomes really, really powerful all of a sudden. So you can have data from lots of different people across the globe that share that, and you can actually report it on the internet. So there's lots of different special websites and things where you can put in if you've seen animals. So like I really like birds. So I have this book, or I have a lot of books, but this is one with a bunch of different kinds of birds in it. And after I see something, I can go on a website or on my phone and report that I saw that bird and where I saw it. And it can help scientists keep track of them. So there's actually a thing called the Big Day that's coming up in May. And that's where you go out for that day or even just in your yard and keep track of all the birds you see, and then you report it. And if everybody does that across the globe, it gives scientists really, really valuable information about bird populations. So you can try doing that. Or there's some things with monarchs. You can see here someone has a sticker on the monarch wing, and it has a number and a tag number, a phone number and a tag number that you can call, and you can report that you saw that monarch. And that information can help scientists keep track of them. So there's also tracking teams. So manual tracking or surveying can be done. It doesn't just have to be, say, me outside looking for a bear. I can have a partner, and that partner might be a dog. And we use dogs because they have super good sniffers. So what if you were going to sniff out an animal, you probably want a dog that's a good tracking dog, or that's really good at smelling things, like maybe a hound or border collies like this that can be trained really well. So once they can sniff things out, what do you guys think they are sniffing for? Do you have any guesses? Lizzie, what's your guess?
They're like sniffing for their scent.
Yep, they can sniff for the scent of the animal, or they can look for something else. Ready?
Poop.
Poop. So because animal poop can be kind of stinky, it can be really easy for the dogs to find the animal scat. And once they find it, scientists can actually collect it, and then they can look in that poop to see what the animals have been eating and how healthy they are and lots of other things. So they can kind of scoop the poop and then collect it and get lots of data from it. So another type of tracking is called VHF radio tracking. And VHF has been around for a long time, since the 1960s. And it's kind of like having a radio station that's on a collar. So the radio station isn't sending out music or words like we would normally hear in the radio in our car, but it's sending out beeps. And so those beeps that come from sorry, the cat just hit the keyboard. Those beeps on the collar of the radio tracker, it's placed on the animal, and then those beeps have to be picked up by an antenna. And so you can see here that this Fish and Wildlife Service person has a big antenna that they're holding out. And what they're doing is walking around and seeing which direction the beep sounds louder from, and then they'll go towards that until they actually find the animal. And so these trackers used to be really, really big in size, so we could only use them on big animals like bears or wolves or things like that. This example here is a tracker collar on an African wild dog. And this tracker also has, you can see a metal bracket on it, and that helps keep it from getting caught in traps and choking. So it can help keep the animal safe and help researchers follow it, which is pretty cool. And in the picture with the person with the antenna, they're actually tracking mountain lions. Yes, Aiden or Lizzie.
I was gonna ask before when you said it was the beach. I was gonna ask if it was like Morse code or something like that.
No, it's not. It's just a regular beep, I think, but that's a really good idea, and that could be helpful if you were trying to figure out exactly which animal it was. Okay. So VHF actually stands for very high frequency. And frequency is like kind of the amount something happens, but we also apply that word to waves that go through the air. And radio frequency is made of electromagnetic waves. So those can go through the air, and the collar or the beacon sends out a pulse. So the only thing with this is that you have to have a line of sight to it. So if the wave, you can imagine, is going through the air, so say here's an elephant and say it's got a collar on that's sending out that beep. And that beep is on a frequency that's really kind of tall like this. It's going through the air, and it's going away from the elephant towards the transmitter. Well, when the transmitter picks it up, it has to be in line with the elephant. So if there were, say, a mountain range in between, you might not be able to pick up the signal. So we call it line of sight. So if you imagine that you don't have to actually be able to see that far, but it has to be a straight line in order for those signals to make it. So that can be a limiting factor of this. However, you can also have things that are called repeaters. So extra antenna kind of in the middle that send out the signal to different places. And the good thing about this is that it's fairly inexpensive for researchers to do. So it's good for short distances, and it's good for large animals. And it's good because it's inexpensive, but other than that, it's kind of limited. So the next one I want to talk about is satellite tracking. And this is really cool. It's kind of similar to the VHF, the very high frequency, but it bounces off of a satellite in space. So because it's going to a satellite in space, it's not limited by distance. So you can track the animal from anywhere. It works for really long distances, and it can be tracked on computers. And the signal goes from the animal to that satellite, but the limit is that it can't go through water. So if you're looking at this turtle, this sea turtle, what do you think is going to happen with that signal underwater? It's not going to go anywhere, right? So what the piece does that's on there is it kind of stores up all the information. And then when the turtle comes to the surface to breathe, then it shoots all that information to the satellite, and then it can go to the researchers. So they can't really use this on animals that are always underwater, but they can use it on animals that come up to the surface occasionally. So even on sharks, if they put it on the fin on their back and they come up to the surface every once in a while, they can get information from it. So it basically stores up the data and it sends it in a big package. Yes, Lizzie.
So like, you probably can't put one of those on an elephant seal.
You can, because the elephant seal needs to come up to the air to breathe.
Yeah, but it'll be underwater for a really long time, like you said before.
Yep, but it'll collect all that information, and the battery actually lasts for a long, long time. It can last for years. So it's okay as long as they're coming up to the surface fairly regularly, like once every couple of days even. In the case of sharks, then this is a good method. But that's a very good question, Lizzie, because it depends on the time. So this is a picture of kind of how it works. So you can see here, there's a shark in the water and it comes up to the surface. The transmitter is on its dorsal fin. It sends that information to the satellite, which bounces it down to a station that receives it. And then that can be processed and sent to a researcher. So the next kind is GPS tracking. And this is probably the kind that's most familiar to you guys. So this is the newest kind of tracking, and it sends a signal in a circle. So it goes from the satellite to from the animal to the satellite, to back to the satellite, and it kind of goes in a big ring. And in that ring, the scientists can pick up all the information that they need, kind of like they're checking out a book from the library, but it keeps cycling and getting more information. And this is really cool because these transmitters can be super, super small. So in the picture on the left here, you see there's a man putting a big transmitter on a moose, right? Because a moose probably isn't going to really notice if he has a collar with a couple extra pounds of weight. It's not a big deal because moose are really big. But for things like birds and other animals, they have to be very, very small. And one way they can make them smaller is by reducing the size of the battery that they need. And so if you can get rid of the battery altogether, then it's even lighter. And in this picture on the right, you can see there's a solar panel on there. So it's actually using power and energy from the sun to keep that unit going. And then it can be smaller, and it can go on other animals that are smaller or can't hold as much weight. So this is how the GPS units work. So it's a little bit different than the ones we talked about before. So in this example, you see a lion, and he's got a collar on. And that signal is coming from the GPS satellites and bouncing to him. And then it's going out to the other satellites or to receivers or to operators. And then all that information can be sent to the user. So in the other cases, the information is going from the animal, the signal goes from the animal to the satellite or the receiver. And in this case, there's actually information going to the animal's receiver as well. So it makes it like a big ring. So now I want to get into the really cool part, which is some of the animals that we can track. And I was able to talk to a couple of friends of mine who used to do some of this work. And so I think you guys will really like this part. So the first one is a desert tortoise. And this isn't my friend Cece, but this is what she did. So she carried around this big antenna thing in the desert and went to look for these desert tortoises in their burrows, because they actually like to hang out in burrows in like the winter and fall, and they don't hibernate. It's something called brumescence, but they kind of are sleepy for that time. So it's easier to find them in their little burrows or their houses. And these are found in the deserts of California and like Nevada and Utah. And they're really in trouble because they move really slow, right? And so they tend to cross roads and things kind of slow, and they can get hit by cars. And there's also a lot of livestock that graze through there. And so they might not have enough food. And so some of the populations of these are listed as threatened. Or remember the line I showed you guys with the giraffes of least concern to extinct? They're getting towards the bad part of that. So there's less and less available. And so we want to make sure that we're studying them very carefully and making sure that the population is growing or at least stable. And one of the difficulties with this is that desert tortoises live for a super long time. So we have to monitor them for a really long time to know what they're doing. They can live for like 25, it can be like 25 years before they even have babies and kind of like get out of their first generation. So we have to keep tracking them for a long time to make sure that the population is okay. And this tracking is done by VHF, or the very high frequency, like I showed you before. So that's why they're walking around with the antennas, because they have to get close to them and figure out where their burrows are. And then they can pull them out and do medical tests on them and other things. Another one is the elephant seal. So if you guys were with us when we talked about that, elephant seals are tracked by GPS. And this is a female elephant seal with a transmitter kind of glued on her head there. And then it looks like she's got another one on her back. And some of the data that comes from them, you can see this is the United States here. And this is, I think, Año Nuevo State Reserve, where a lot of the elephant seals hang out. And you can see how far they travel. Remember, we talked about them crossing the Pacific Ocean? So they can go all the way out here. And this is a bunch of data from different seals. The lines are where they've been moving, but you can see they're really traveling super far. And we know that because of those transponders that are on them. So these usually use GPS, or otherwise satellite tags will sometimes work for them. And they've been monitoring these elephant seals for so long, and they've been monitoring so many, that it's one of the biggest sets of information that we have, especially about animals that are predators. So marine mammals and predatory marine mammals are really at a great risk for population reduction and for other things. And so we need to be extra sure to keep them safe. And so it's important to monitor them. And so there's been a couple of papers, scientific papers published about this, but this is where we find out things about their foraging trips that we talked about, how they can dive over a mile under the water. And remember, we saw the information with how they slow their heart rate down when they're down low. We're finding these things out from these cool trackers. Let's see. Another one is whale sharks. So you guys might have seen a whale shark in an aquarium at some point or seen a picture of them, but they're very, very big animals, and they're critically endangered, I believe, right now. So what I want to show you guys with this is actually something that I think is really cool. This is real time. So you can see this whale shark right here has a transmitter on its dorsal fin. And you can go to this website, it's conservation.org, and I put a link in the presentation for you. But check this out. We're tracking whale sharks in real time. So this is where these sharks are right now at this moment in time. So this is the Pacific Ocean. Down here is is Australia, and here's Papua New Guinea, and we're getting into Indonesia in here. And you can see each different color is a different whale shark. And so I can click on this and see that this one, Nexus, let's look at his information. It says he was tagged in 2017. He's a male and he's about 13 feet long. And he last transmitted in May of 2018. So you can actually click on this and see what these whale sharks are doing at different times, and you can see pictures of them and find out how recently they've been seen. So this information is available to just anybody. You can go ahead and look at this and you can see what all of these whale sharks are doing, and they all have fun names over here. I think there's even one called Sharky McSharkface that they've tagged. So I think this is pretty cool that this information is available in the world. It's very neat to be able to see where they're going.
Mommy, now you have to go through all of them and find Sharky McShark. Yeah.
So I did put a link to this on here. So if you guys want to play with it and see where the whale sharks are, you can. Another one is California condors. So this one is, I think, really cool because I volunteer at Pinnacles National Park, which is one of the sites of the Condor Restoration Project. So where I think it was down to like 60 condors in the entire world at one point. And now I think there's about 180 that live in the wild. And they all have individual tags that are on their wings. So you can see this one has 67. And these tags are a visual cue for people who see them that aren't scientists. And they're also GPS trackers. So the cool thing about this is that by using a combination of these two tools, you can really get other people involved that maybe aren't scientists in tracking these animals. So for me, if I'm out, like I was out at Big Sur recently, and I got to see a condor and I could report my sighting just as a regular person and not a scientist. But they can also use the GPS data here to get information on them. So this one's a cool combination. Elephants also frequently use GPS. So you can see this elephant actually has a big old collar on. And the idea is that the information from the elephants, this one was on the Masai Mara Reserve, I believe, in Africa. And the information for elephants has to do with where they travel. So you can see they've figured out that these elephants, their route here is in red. This is across the entire continent of Africa. They're traveling really, really long ways and kind of looping around. And one of the things you can see from this map is that elephants don't care what country they're in, and they don't care about borders. So this is a big hurdle for conservation, because if the laws are keeping elephants safe, say in Namibia, but they're not keeping them safe in Zimbabwe, and they get to Zimbabwe and they get poached, that's a big problem. So this is part of the reason that we need to partner with other people to help keep these animals safe, because they don't really care what country or city or state they're in. Sea turtles are also tracked by satellite. So you can see here, there's a bunch of epoxy, or basically really strong glue, that's holding on this satellite tracker onto the sea turtle. And I don't think they usually have such big antenna, but remember the satellite tracker sends information when they come up for air. So this is another one where I'm going to show you, I'm going to show you this tracker, and this is something that you guys can go and look at too. So this is the Sea Turtle Conservancy, and they have a bunch of different turtles, all with different names. And they're different kinds of turtles. So some are loggerheads. This one's a green sea turtle. There's hawksbill sea turtles. So there's a bunch of different kinds that they tag. And you can click on these and see where they've been and even look at their migration map. So this one, his name is Ariel. And you can see it's hanging around. There she is right now. There's a little turtle. And if we zoom out, we can see where this is. This is down in Florida. And look at that. She's also traveled all the way down and around and up here. So we can actually learn a lot. It may have looked initially like she was just hanging out in one little spot, but they actually travel for long distances. And animals are traveling these distances to do different important things, like eat food or make babies or to look for other resources that they need. Sometimes they go back to the place that they were born, actually. So you guys can go ahead and look at this if you would like. You can look up all the different turtles in the turtle tracker and the active turtles, and they all have names and everything. So you can see what they're doing right now, which I think is pretty neat. And those trackers, because they are glued on, they don't really last forever, but they'll stay on for a pretty long time. And then usually by the time that the glue is starting to come off, the trackers actually are also starting to run out of batteries. So sometimes they're found floating and they'll be collected by researchers, and sometimes they're just kind of lost. Okay, so we're going to talk about homework with prizes. So I was really excited about this one today. So for little kids 0 to 6, you guys can choose a picture to draw. As always, it can be an animal with a tracking device on it. It could be a map of where your favorite animal lives. It doesn't have to be an animal that we talked about today. It could be any animal. Or a list of 5 species that you would like to see tracked. So say that you really want to know what your cat does if it goes outside during the day. You could even add that if you want to. The next one is for big kids. Please draw a picture of 2 track species and point out their tracking system. Or you can make a comic about how a tracking system works, or look up tracking info for an animal of your choosing and do a short write-up of where they travel. So you could look up the whales, or you could look up the turtles and pick one and tell me what its name is and tell me where they go. Middle schoolers, you guys can write a paragraph explaining the different tracking systems and how they work. You can draw a range map for your favorite species and explain why the information is important and why we need to know it. Or you can make a comic about tracking animals and how they're tagged. Because if you think about it, you probably can't put a collar on a lion just out in the wild. You have to sedate it, and it's a whole process. So if you want to look that up and learn more about it, please do.
You can just slap it on the lion when it's in the zoo.
Well, then it wouldn't go anywhere, so the information wouldn't be easy. Silly goose. High schoolers, if there are any, you can choose an individual animal and use its tracking data to explain more about it, or write a short paper describing one of the methods of tracking along with the pros and the cons, so the good and the bad of using that method.
I meant you would let it out of the zoo.
Maybe. So finally, you guys know you can email your homework to me, and the company that I work for, Scientist.com, has been really nice and is paying for $10 gift cards for the raffle afterwards. And I included a bunch more resources for you guys today. So I ran out of space because I looked at so many different websites, but you can learn more about how dogs help track endangered species and how they sniff out the scat and things. You can learn about tracking marine animals, and then you can see some of these things down here have real-time data for you to look at. And this one I want to point out is Mojave Max. He's actually a symbol of the Desert Conservation Program, and he is a desert tortoise. And on his website, there are a bunch of fun things that you can do. You can kind of explore around, and they have different programs. And see, he's a little cute cartoon, and he actually just woke up for the year. So there he is. He just came out of his brumation and came out of his burrow last week. So if you want to learn more about Mojave Max, you can go there. Okay, guys, that was it for our class today. Thank you so much for joining. It was really exciting for me to learn more about and to talk about things that my friends got to do when they were in college. And I will not be here Monday. We're not going to have a class on Monday, but we will be back next Thursday. So I will see you guys all then, okay?